So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start with our first speaker. She is here, Dr. Lihini Aluwihare. She serves as a marine chemist at UCSD and is currently the head of the Earth section at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So I'll now turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Darren, and thanks to the rest of the project. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. For inviting me to talk to you a little bit about my career and the experiences that I have had in that career. I'll start off by sharing a few slides and saying a few things, and then if we should have plenty of time for anything else that you hope to achieve in the 25 minutes that we have for my presentation. Okay. All right. Does that show up okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. So my name, as Darren said, is Lihini Aluwihare. I am a professor of marine chemistry at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is a department of the University of California, San Diego. Scripps is one of the premier oceanography institutions in the world and one of two of the larger ones in the United States. So these photos show actually what the view from my office looks like. Unfortunately, I don't spend as much time in that office as I would like to these days, but many of you may be familiar with this. This is La Jolla Cove, and La Jolla Shores Beach is just down in this photo here. And then there's the iconic, the iconic Scripps Pier that's actually over 100 years old. There's chemical and physical measurements that have been taken at that pier now, I think, for 104 years. And so it's a really valuable time series of how our ocean is changing, even this close to the coast. So Darren asked me to talk a little bit about kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And of course, just remember that's just me, not every professor at University of California, San Diego. So just keep that in mind. And I wanted to say that probably these days, it's not that different from what you do on a day-to-day basis. I spend an inordinate amount of time on Zoom, which of course is not my favorite mode of communication. Teaching through Zoom I find extremely challenging because I value kind of the feedback, facial expressions and people falling asleep, that kind of stuff that I get in class. So that helps me to up my game a little bit when I'm teaching. But in terms of really what my job entails, it's a lot of different things, but I think first and foremost, I'm a scientist. That's what I have loved since I was young, different kinds of science. I started off, building Lego race tracks for snails, and I grew up in Southern Africa, in Zambia, and I spent most of my holidays and weekends going to game parks and seeing big game animals and reading books about people who tamed game animals. And I wanted to be an ecologist, but then I went to high school and really fell in love with chemistry, and that's the scientist I am today. I always see the world in terms of chemistry. The second thing that I am every day is a mentor. This is a photo of some of my students that we took after a conference that took place in San Diego in February, right before the pandemic shut everything down. And it's just a few of the students, graduate students. So these are all students who got their PhDs working with me. These are a few of the students that I've had over the years and some who are still in my lab. And everything I do, honestly, on a day-to-day basis has my scientist side and my mentor side, whether it's teaching undergraduates, whether it's dealing with my own graduate students, but also young faculty. I have been at Scripps a long time, as you'll see in a little bit. I'm also a professor, so that means I teach both undergraduate and graduate classes. Most of my teaching is at the undergraduate level right now, and I teach courses like California coastal oceanography, so teaching about the local ocean environment in our backyard. I also teach a very intro-level class called Environmental Systems, and that just introduces non-science majors to the way we think about problems in environmental science. I'm also a university leader. As Darren said, I'm the head of the Earth section, but I've also spent over a decade working on ways to increase access to underrepresented scholars at the university. And so I spend actually, a significant amount of time thinking about that, training myself to be better at that, because as a scientist, that's not the kind of training that I had. And I believe that once you have access to this really incredible environment that is academia, it is your really duty to make sure that others have the same sorts of access. And then nothing really happens without my child in the back of my mind. He's 11 now, so I can kind of ignore him most of the time. But it's impossible to say that my work life does not in some way intersect my personal life. This is actually not my own dog. I fostered him. He was my last foster puppy, but I have 3 dogs of my own. So I basically am a mother to my child and to my dogs, and those things do take time. And one thing I want to point out right away is that you can't be all of these things all the time. And I think this is something that adults find out, and even students in high school, as they try to balance things like this, which is doing really great community outreach work, schoolwork and sports, is that, you have to learn how to balance your time. And so I think every person that aims to achieve a high level in their careers have to learn how to do that and not beat yourself up when you can't do all of the things all the time. It's just not possible. The thing that I love the most about what I do, but I don't do that as much as I used to, the reason I got into this field is because I love going into the field. I go out primarily on the ocean in the California current system these days, but I have been to Antarctica. I was very lucky to have a 8-week research cruise down there, and just was really one of the most life-changing experiences that I've had. But the ocean everywhere is beautiful and calming, and it's anything you do, you learn. So here's me out at sea. I'm deploying this instrument. The seas are a little bit rough. It wasn't the greatest day on the water that day. But one of the reasons I show this is because one thing about being a research scientist, especially one that works in the field, is that you have what you took out with you on the boat. Nobody's gonna come back to land to help you get another battery or something like that. So oftentimes you're an electrician, you're an engineer, you're always a plumber, because I work a lot with water filtration. And it's not that I know any of these skills, but you do what you have to do to get as much of your science done as possible. This is the Roger Ravel, which is one of Scripps' iconic ships. This ship costs about $30 a day, and that's usually paid for by the National Science Foundation. So that's why you got to learn how to be all these things, because nobody's going to be too happy if your $30,000 don't go somewhere. So, and then this is just a picture to show, there's the field work, but there's the lab work too. We spend a lot of time processing our samples when we get back from sea. And that also entails a lot of different skills, not just learning how to keep a good lab notebook and, recording everything, but also learning that failure is part of the process, and that, you have to learn from your mistakes and not be embarrassed to face them. And so every day, that kind of reality is with you. So how did I get here? My path was pretty straight, and that's not typically the way it always happens. I got my bachelor's degree at Mount Holyoke College. It's an all-women's college in Massachusetts. It's one of the Seven Sisters. The Seven Sisters were originally founded because women couldn't go to university, to the Ivy Leagues specifically. So these are the Seven Sister companions to the Ivy League schools in the United States. And I had a fantastic experience there. And it really allowed me to build my confidence and learn also about the role that women have played in science. A lot of times, the roles of women and the roles of underrepresented scholars aren't always demonstrated in sort of your everyday kind of access to education. So that was really important to me. I went straight on to do my PhD. I was supposed to do, I had applied and had been accepted at Columbia University to do a PhD in chemistry. And the summer before I went to Columbia, I was a foreign student. I had to find something to do while I was in the United States. And so I spent the summer at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And when I was there, I really fell in love with the oceanography aspect of my chemistry training. And so I withdrew my acceptance from Columbia and attended the oceanography program. It's a joint program between the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. So I got my PhD there. That's also in Massachusetts in Cape Cod. And then I moved across the country for the first time. I came to California. I was a postdoctoral fellow, so this is very typical after your PhD. You try to get some training, maybe in a different kind of technique, but just definitely being exposed to a different kind of lab and research environment is really important. And then very soon after that, I was lucky to be able to become a professor at Scripps and at UC San Diego, and that's essentially where I've been for the last, well, as you can see, the last 20 years. It's, you progress through the ranks. There's different steps through which you have to be promoted. But because I've been here such a long time, I do take my responsibilities very seriously in terms of making sure that others have access to this academic environment as well. And I have a few bullet points here, but I'm happy to talk more about this. I was just thinking about things that, Darren had asked me to think about, but I just give you a few examples and we can talk more if people have questions. I came into this field because, as I explained, I always loved learning about the natural world. I think it's one of the most fundamental loves that all of us are born with, and some of us get lucky and can do that for our careers. I was in high school when I realized that, one of the ways that I could sort of rise above my family situation was to be able to have access to education. That was really one thing I had control over. And so I decided that I would pursue a PhD because I knew that it would open up some careers that I thought would be things that I would enjoy. And so that was really kind of my focus, was to get a PhD, and that started really as early as high school. In terms of hardships, I think we all, have our own demons that we're battling with. So it's nothing, I think everyone has something that they have to overcome. In my own case, one of the things that really stressed me out in high school was that my parents couldn't afford to pay for my college. So I knew I had to get scholarships or take out loans. And that's one of the reasons I ended up coming to college in the United States. I had gone to high school elsewhere. As a foreign student in the United States, it was very difficult. I didn't have family here. And there was really I couldn't mess up, right? There was nowhere to go to. There was no financial security. There was no home. And so that was, always something that kept me sort of focused and moving forward. And then at Scripps and at UC San Diego, it's been really interesting because, I've been at Scripps, I was the only brown female faculty member for really 17 years out of 200 or so scientists there. And so that has unique challenges that you don't even really realize until someone names them or until you can name them for yourself. And then I think in terms of what I've learned, you really have to love yourself. If you don't love yourself, you don't have the confidence to achieve the things in the face of hardship. It's important to be courageous and be bold, and that's not always easy. And it takes time and experience to really recognize what that looks like for you. It's important to be true to who you are, always be authentic. Don't ever apologize for your circumstances or anything like that. And in science, it's really important to learn how to deal with criticism constructively. You get criticized for everything from every, that's sort of how our promotion process, our paper writing, our proposal writing, that all is about taking criticism constructively. And then when you have the opportunity and you're in a place where you can do that, always learn to advocate for others. I think that's really key. And then in terms of advice that I might have for people in high school today, just, go for it, right? Like if there's something that you want to give, you want to try, just do it. But it's also important to be realistic, understand your strengths and your weaknesses. Where do you do well and where you don't? Not everyone should do everything in the same way. That is what makes the process more interesting, more creative. It's all what we bring to the table, each of us. And so, for example, you might be interested in marine science, but you're not doing really well in science classes. You don't get excited about kind of that like you don't get goosebumps when you learn about orbitals or something like that. But maybe you're a really gifted writer, and there's a really important place for people who can learn to communicate science well, or write grants, or help write policy. So those are some ways to think about how to deploy your strengths if maybe science is not something that you really get excited about. And so those are just a few of the things I wanted to say. And I don't know if I have some time for questions, or if the committee or the panel has something to say.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, like, what sort of projects do you do on a day-to-day basis, or what are some examples of things you are doing currently?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. So there's different things. So one of the things that I work in the California current system a lot, which is the main ocean current that moves along the coast of California. Is highly productive. We have a very productive fishery. And I study nutrient cycling in that system. So for example, I use something called isotopes that some of you are familiar with if you've done chemistry, but the different distribution of isotopes in a particular chemical, in this case, the nutrient nitrate, can tell you a lot about the processes that have happened to that nitrate before it got there. And you can also use it to look at, go back in time and look at how nutrient availability might have changed and how that might be related to natural cycles of climate, but also the potential for the impact of warming on the oceans. So that's one aspect of things. I have a project that I'm actually trying to get funded right now to work on harmful algal blooms actually in Botswana. There's been some indication that they've been killing some wildlife there, and I'm interested in the chemicals really that act as these neurotoxins in that system. So that just gives you kind of a sense of the spread of things that I might be interested in working on.
I think we also had a question in the Q&A. Where are you from?
Um, I was born in Sri Lanka. My parents are Sri Lankan. For those of you who don't know, it's a small island in the Indian Ocean, just the southern coast of India. But I grew up in Zambia. I moved there when I was 7, and I grew up there. And then I also got a scholarship to go to boarding school in England. So so from 8th grade through 11th grade, I spent in the United Kingdom, and then I came to the United States for college.
And then, what are some of the highs and lows of your job?
Yeah. Well, the highs are always the students, especially my graduate students. They're the ones who really keep me connected to the science, and they're always challenging me in ways that I couldn't challenge myself. So that's a high. Being able to do what I love to do, that's a real privilege, and I'm grateful for that every day. In terms of the lows, there are problems that I can't solve, and a lot of those are on the administrative side. So, people who are having a tough time, especially right now with COVID and balancing everything and just not being able to fix everything. That's difficult. And when my students graduate and go on, it's a bittersweet thing. I miss them when they leave. So.
I actually wanted, oh, Rohan, do you have a
Yeah, I
question?
have a quick question. So, how has COVID affected your like workflow like recently?
Yeah, so we at UCSD, it's 25% kind of occupancy. So we have to really restrict access to the labs. And so that's, but at the same time, we all have, as scientists, we're employed, as students get paid. Where it's really tough is when you see what's happening to the staff and, there's layoffs, but also people with young children. So it really has affected people's productivity. And but on the plus side, I think the silver lining is that we are all more closely connected. I have no choice. Like my son might show up or my dogs show up, and oftentimes in academia we pretend we don't have personal lives, and obviously that's not the case. And I think it has made people more human and aware of the humanity of others, which I think is really valuable.
Looks like we had another one. If you could go back to your high school self, what advice would you give yourself with your experience now?
I wish I could go back to my high school self. I was so full of optimism and possibility. Um, you know, I don't, it's a really great question. I think I didn't, this is something that you guys will be surprised to hear, but I didn't get to spend enough time with my parents. That's probably one of my greatest regrets is that I didn't really get the opportunity to learn about their experiences. I left home when I was really young, and at the time I didn't realize how much I would miss out as a result of that. Um, I think I was also really focused on getting my education. I wasn't a very multi-dimensional individual. And so I really appreciate seeing people who can really develop other sides of their personality at the same time as being focused on their schoolwork. So that's a regret, perhaps.
I have one question. What is the most interesting project you've done?
I think actually, I was going to say Antarctica, but that was just fun to be there. I worked in the Sierra Lakes, so Lake Tahoe, which is just in your backyard. Um, and it's a really cool system. Like you wouldn't think so, but it's 500 meters deep, so it's one of the deepest lakes in the world. And it really behaves a lot like the ocean. But an interesting thing about it is that many lakes, you have streams that come in and streams that go out. In Tahoe, you have only one stream that leaves. And so there's some really interesting organisms, microorganisms that grow there. There's really interesting metabolisms. And so it's interesting in the sense that it was totally unexpected. And we really learned some new things, just like new things completely, not just about Tahoe, but about the nitrogen cycling in aquatic environments, just right here, 6 hours up the street. So.
Looks like we have another question in the Q&A. What are some things students should start doing in high school to prepare if someone is looking to go into a science field? And I'll actually expand. If someone's looking to go specifically into like an oceanography field or chemistry field, what are some things that high schoolers can do to prepare?
Right. Things are very different from when I was in your position, but I would say, and this is still something I think that's universal. Learn. We expect people to have a really strong basic science background. We don't expect you to be an oceanographer coming in. We don't expect you to be an earth scientist. It's very important that you understand the fundamentals of physics and chemistry and biology because those are universal principles. it is also one thing I didn't realize in high school, and that maybe that is a regret. You have to be able to express yourself both in writing and oral communication. It is probably the most important skill that you could have, even in a STEM field. Um, and then, just recognize that you're always learning. So I have to learn new things all the time. So you don't have to have everything. You just need to have, I think, a basic understanding of an understanding of the basic sciences and your ability to communicate. And I think just, also being able to, as I said, being able to you have to be strong. You have to have the ability to take criticism. It is just the nature. Hopefully it'll change by the time you guys get here, but I'm not so sure. So from a personality side, just try not to take things personally and just figure out how to do better next time.
All right, and just I think one more question, one more thing that I wanted to know. What did you do in Antarctica? Because that sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. So the United States has a whole bunch of sites all around the world. They're called long-term ecological research sites. So there's actually one in the California Current, and that's one of the ones I work in. And they're funded on, they're 5-year cycles, and the whole idea is to have a long-term sense of what's going on. So there happens to be one off of Palma Station, which is on the Antarctic Peninsula. And so you take usually for that, so that's a 6-week research cruise. You leave from Punta Arenas in Chile. And what I was doing there is that in the summertime, there's this, there's a layer of fresh water in the upper ocean that's really interesting in terms of the science there. So I was interested in the microbial communities that live in the water around Antarctica, and kind of how they mediate different kinds of nitrogen cycling. But the LTR is very diverse. So you have people studying zooplankton, and one of the really cool things is that there are always people that study penguins. So they can't do that from the boat that we were in, the big ship. So you always have to stop and drop them off on like one of the penguin rookeries. So that always gives everyone an opportunity to sort of step on the continent a little bit. And so that part of it was really exciting. So, yeah.
All right, so unless anyone has any questions that they want to ask right now, big thank you to you, Dr. Aluwihare.